like I said, I'm about the knobs all day long, and this has quite a nice one. This is the Audi A5 Coupe, and in principle, it's quite a compelling proposition. It's got those attractive coupe looks, it can allegedly seat 4 people, and it doesn't cost the earth. If you haven't been brainwashed by the plethora of mid-sized SUVs, and you're not playing it safe with a hatchback, well then this could be worth looking into. As I've said, it's a reasonably attractive car. It's the kind of thing that when you drive it down the road, people look at you and think, yeah, that person's made the right decisions in life. The main highlight for me is definitely this big grille. The single frame honeycomb grille is now wider than before, more narrow than before, and also has these little ventilation slits in the top that reference the Audi Sport Quattro from 1984. Although, of course, it's completely fake. That's simply there to make the car look cool, but it works. I also like these distinctive DRLs. The day running lights in this car look really nice. Down here, you got these fake vents. Not completely fake though, because there are 3 little holes that channel air into somewhere doing something. One thing I'm not so keen on though is the bonnet. I love the fact that it's got these creases which make it look quite aggressive, but look at this, it doesn't quite connect to the fender, it hangs over. When I first saw this car, I thought, someone's crashed it on this side. So then I had to look at the other side and I thought, they've crashed it here as well. But apparently that's just design. As I've said, this is a coupe, meaning it only has 2 passenger doors, which is quite unusual. A car this size normally comes with 4 doors because most people travel with other human beings. But I guess this is a car for selfish people. But you can get 4 people in the A5 Coupe. Let me demonstrate. What you have to do is, of course, open the door and then pull the lever on the seat, drag the seat all the way forward, and then pour your body into this quite tiny gap and into the seat. Once you're in, I'm 5'11" by the way, and this front seat is adjusted for me, you'll see you have 0.1 millimeters of legroom and minus 0.1 millimeters of headroom. So it's very claustrophobic back here. However, you do have 2 USB ports, dedicated temperature controls, a couple of ISOFIX points, a little armrest with some storage down here, and 2 cup holders. But honestly, this is not a place that you want to be spending too much of your time. To get out, you've got to make people remove themselves from the front seats and then pour yourself through that tiny gap once again. And getting out is quite awkward as well. You tend to drag your leg along the door sill and can get dirty jeans. So for me, yeah, get a car with 4 doors, seriously. Right, round the back, nothing too aggressive, nothing too spectacular, but again, a pretty decent looking design with these huge exhaust tips, which don't actually connect to the real exhaust, but we'll forgive that. As for the boot, quite spacious. You get 450 litres of room in here. You can also fold down the seats by pulling these little tabs, so you can extend the amount of storage you have in here. You also get this very clever hook for hanging your shopping, which is a nice little touch. Not the most practical car in the world, but more practical than you might imagine. So the first thing you notice about the Audi A5 Coupe on the road is the interesting ergonomics, shall we say. These sport seats come as standard in the S-Line, and I must say that even though they're quite comfortable, you sit really high in this car. This is the lowest setting for these seats. In a sporty car, you expect to sit quite low, to feel a connection with the chassis, to feel at one with the vehicle, but in this, it feels a bit more like an SUV. There's actually quite a lot of adjustability in the seat as well. You can get really high to get lots of visibility out of the car. So if you're a short person, if you're vertically challenged, then an Audi A5 Coupe might be quite ideal for you. The second thing you notice is that the interior is pretty nice. Unspectacular, but nice. You don't get the latest version of Audi's MMI system, you get the previous generation, so you don't get that double touchscreen system, which has 1 screen for your infotainment system and 1 screen for your heating, ventilation and climate controls. Instead, you get a single tablet mounted on top of the dashboard. There's nothing wrong with that. It works quite well. The generation before this was controlled using a twisty knob thing that enabled you to select options, but this one is a touchscreen and it's quite responsive and very logical and easy to use. You'll also notice and appreciate the fact that you get a 12-inch virtual cockpit, a big screen just in front of the steering wheel that shows you all your driving data. Again, this looks good and works well, and the highlight here is that enormous Google Maps display that you get to show you exactly where you are and where you're headed. I must say, it makes a nice change going back to the previous generation of Audis, because this one has a physical volume knob on the center console. The current crop all use a weird old iPod style touchpad controller thing that adjusts your volume, but like I said, I'm about the knobs all day long, and this has quite a nice one. The other thing you'll notice in the A5 pretty much straight away is that there's quite a lot of road noise, and I think that's caused by the tires. You get this low frequency rumble, even at reasonably low speeds. At motorway speeds, it gets a little bit worse, and that can cause the journey to become quite tiresome. As for engines, you get a choice of 2 petrol and 2 diesels. As for the diesels, there's a 40 TDI and a 35 TDI. The 40 TDI makes 204 horsepower, while the 35 TDI makes 163. The 2 petrols, meanwhile, are a 40 TFSI, which makes 204 horsepower, and a 35 TFSI, that's this one, which makes 150 horsepower. It's not the most powerful engine in the world, and that means the car isn't particularly fast. It'll do 0 to 62 in 8.9 seconds, and the top speed is limited to 140 miles an hour. It's not exactly thrilling. You put your foot down and it does take a little while for it to pick up. It makes quite a lot of noise, but there isn't a lot of acceleration to go with it. My recommendation is that you definitely go for the 40 TFSI, because look, there are some cracking deals on that engine at the moment. As for the character of the engine, well, normally it's quite good, but I have noticed that when you're idling, when you're just parked up with the engine running, occasionally the engine will rock back and forth. It's almost like being caught in a slight crosswind, but when you're on the move and you're accelerating up through the gears, it's a 4-cylinder, but it's reasonably smooth. And the tone isn't bad either. As for handling, I'd say the A5 is competent. That's probably the best compliment I can pay this car. The steering is reasonably slow, so it takes big movements to get it to do anything, and once you're in the corner, it's actually quite trustworthy. It never does anything to surprise you. It doesn't oversteer, it doesn't really understeer too much either. It's quite benign, it's quite predictable. If you're a person who doesn't like to be surprised or challenged by your vehicle, I'd say the A5 is probably going to suit you down to the ground. If you're someone who looks for some element of driver involvement from your car, I'd say that it's probably going to disappoint you. The gearbox in the Audi A5 is a dual clutch S-tronic unit, and generally speaking, it's actually pretty responsive. It gives you the gear you want when you want it. If you've got it in manual mode and you're using the paddles behind the steering wheel, it shifts up and down the box quite enthusiastically. And again, if you leave it in automatic drive mode, it does the job that you'd expect it to pretty competently. The only problem is that the power is sent to the front wheels rather than the rear wheels. Audi do sell a version with quattro all-wheel drive, but to me, having a front-wheel drive coupe is slightly blasphemous. Coupes are supposed to be involving, are supposed to be fun to drive, but having a front-wheel drive car that looks as cool as this one, I don't know, it just doesn't really sit right with me. And that pretty much sums this car up, I think. Audi know their audience inside out, and they're aiming it at people who don't particularly care about driving. They're aiming it at people who just want a nice, safe, good-looking car that they can pose in. But if you're the kind of person that demands more from their car, a person that demands more engagement, more excitement, I dare say there are other cars out there on the market that will give you a much bigger thrill.